They came to Venus because Earth was running out of second chances. The old world had grown tired, its oceans rising with a quiet sigh, its lands parched and cracked under a relentless sun. Nations, once grand, now squabbled over dwindling reservoirs and fertile soil. So a small, determined band of dreamers pragmatists turned their gaze outward, not to the familiar red of Mars, but to the shrouded, pearlescent glow of Venus. There, suspended in the acidic clouds, they built a city in a bottle, a testament to human ingenuity. And to protect it, they forged a single unbending rule, a prime directive for a species on the brink. They called it the first law: survival, not expansion. Venus is a planet of profound and violent contradictions. From a distance, it is the morning star, a beacon of serene beauty in Earth's twilight sky. Up close, it is a furnace. The planet's slow, retrograde rotation means a single Venusian day lasts longer than its year, baking one side while the other freezes in a prolonged night. Its thick atmosphere, a runaway greenhouse effect in action, traps heat with ruthless efficiency. Surface temperatures soar to over 460 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. This is not a world that welcomes life. It is a world that actively, chemically and physically works to dismantle it. The colonists of Ethelgard did not need to be reminded of this. They lived with the evidence every moment. The air itself is a poison. Composed almost entirely of carbon dioxide, with thick clouds of sulfuric acid droplets, it is corrosive to almost any material. Early robotic probes sent to the surface lasted mere hours before being crushed and corroded into silence. The first colonists arrived not with a thunderous roar of rockets, but with the quiet precision of a surgeon making an incision. Their ships, stripped to essentials, were designed for a one-way journey. They landed on a pre-selected high plateau known for relatively stable atmospheric conditions. In dim, filtered sunlight, they began assembling their home. The first domes were inflated. Life support systems whirred to life. The first seeds were planted in nutrient-rich gel under full-spectrum LEDs. Hope was tangible, as precious as oxygen. Founding specialists, engineers, botanists, doctors, pilots. Their first years were brutal but vital lessons. Each failure was a teacher. Each repair a quiet celebration. Small, intimate victories, not parades. Water reclamation hit 99.8%. First harvest yielded more than expected. A communal feast. The delicate equilibrium of Ethelgard could not last forever. Venus, as if offended by this pocket of stubborn life, began to test its limits. The crises did not arrive as a single dramatic catastrophe, but as a series of small compounding failures. A death by 1,000 cuts. A solar flare, larger than any previously recorded, bathed the upper atmosphere in radiation, frying a key communications relay satellite. Suddenly, their link to Earth, already tenuous, became intermittent and unreliable. A minor tremor in the planet's crust sent a resonant shockwave through the atmosphere, leaving hairline fractures in a secondary greenhouse dome, sealing off an entire section of food production for 2 weeks. Stores of preserved rations had to be opened. Shortly after, a resilient, unforeseen strain of fungus contaminated one of the primary protein vats. The problems overlapped, creating a cascade of emergencies. Repair crews were working double shifts. A faction began to form. The only way to build a true buffer against disaster was to grow. They needed to break the first law, well, you know. Section 5. A vote between hope and prudence. The debate over the first law cleaved the colony in two. The expansionist faction, led by a charismatic young engineer named Lena, argued with passionate logic. They presented detailed projections of a second, larger habitat module, hydroponic bays, advanced fabrication units. This would create a surplus of food and parts. security the colony was losing. On the other side stood the keepers of the law. Elias countered with a stark calculus. The resources required would have to be diverted from maintaining existing, life-sustaining systems. For months, perhaps a year, Ethelgard would be at its most vulnerable. One cannot build a second lifeboat by dismantling the first. The debate raged for weeks. It was civil, but deeply fractured. Families found themselves on opposite sides. Friendships were strained. Lena's faction spoke of courage, of seizing destiny, of the human spirit's need to build and explore. Elias and his supporters spoke of duty, of responsibility to the lives they already had. A small, steady flame that burns for 1,000 years is better than a bonfire that consumes itself in an hour. Ultimately, the decision was put to a colony-wide vote. The result was agonizingly close. The colony voted to uphold the first law: no expansion. The dream of growth was deferred, and the burden of survival was reaffirmed. Section 6. The quiet grief of restraint. The aftermath of the vote was not marked by celebration or defeat. There was only a profound and heavy quiet. Those who had voted to uphold the law felt not triumph, but the somber weight of their responsibility, knowing they had denied the community a powerful source of hope. The expansionist faction experienced a unique kind of grief, the mourning of a future that would not come to be. Lena performed her duties with her usual efficiency, but the fire in her eyes had been banked. Unity preserved, laced with unspoken regrets. Here on Venus, a new kind of courage was being forged. It was the courage to say no and choose the harder, slower, safer path. The quiet fortitude of the maintenance worker, knowing that their unseen labour is what keeps everyone alive. Beauty was not in abundance, but in resilience. Denied the outlet of expansion, the colonists channeled their formidable ingenuity inward. They turned their entire society into a laboratory for perfecting the art of sustainability. Survival was no longer just a goal, it became their craft. It became their science. It became their art form. Engineers who might have designed new starships instead focused on a single atmospheric condenser, increasing extraction by a fraction of a percent. Over a year, hundreds of litres added to the reserve. The most respected members were the master technicians, the fixers, teaching the younger generation to feel the rhythm of a machine. Botanists bred thriftier life. Materials scientists perfected reclamation, reprinting stronger parts from waste. The first law transformed into a source of identity and pride. They were the keepers of a fragile flame, the improvised patch that saved lives, held up with quiet reverence. They worked together, you know. Not everyone accepted the new reality. A small, clandestine group composed mostly of geologists and former members of Lena's faction refused to let the dream of expansion die. Driven by this conviction, they began a secret project using scavenged parts and siphoned energy. They constructed a small, shielded exploration drone. Their goal was to defy the law in secret. The drone launched during heavy cloud cover. It surveyed a nearby, unexplored canyon in the upper atmosphere. Tucked into a recess, shielded from the worst winds, was a massive, exposed deposit of rare earth minerals. The very materials needed for next-generation batteries and solar collectors. Emboldened, they ran a covert mining mission. The operation was a success. New batteries were fabricated, lights burned a little brighter, energy rations relaxed. It felt like a turning point. But the first law is a teacher of unseen costs. The deposit had acted as a natural plug for a pocket of superheated gas. With the plug weakened, gas vented slowly at first, then with increasing force, until a massive plume erupted into the path of the colony. Alarms blared, a residential dome buckled. One technician, outside on routine repair, was lost instantly. The secret promise had exacted a bitter price. The aftermath of the vent disaster, a period of quiet, collective shame. The secret team confessed immediately. There were no trials or punishments in the traditional sense. The loss and damage were sentence enough. The incident became a brutal, unforgettable lesson. The first law was not an arbitrary rule to be debated or circumvented. It was a description of reality. The interconnectedness of their environment was more complex and more fragile than they had ever imagined. Their single greatest resource was not minerals, energy, but predictability. The tragedy cemented the law's place at the center of their culture. A new proposal met with, what is the unseen cost? This question was not born of cynicism, but of a hard-won wisdom. On Venus, every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and some reactions are catastrophic. A young astrophysicist designed a tiny craft for a brief orbit. Her dream was to see the stars without the filter of the atmosphere, to experience the pure, silent dark of space. The council listened, then gently refused. Heartbroken, she launched anyway. A brilliant silver streak before it faltered, tumbled, and burned up in the thick atmosphere. Years flowed into decades. Ethelgard settled into a slow, predictable rhythm. The colony did not grow in size, but it grew in age and wisdom. Children were born. They grew old. The systems, maintained with an almost religious devotion, far outlasted their design specs. And then, a message arrived from Earth, clear and strong, on a channel silent for a generation. Humanity had pulled back from the brink. New carbon capture, stabilized coasts, forests regrowing, and safer, more efficient spacecraft. The message was an offer. Earth could now support the expansion of the Venus colony. The choice was no longer about survival versus expansion. It was about purpose. In the end, they chose a middle path. They did not expand to grow larger, but to grow stronger. A single, separate research dome to trial technologies. A small, carefully vetted group of new colonists, not to increase population, but to enrich the gene pool and knowledge base. Growth became a buffer for survival, not a replacement. They looked at the beautiful, deadly clouds not with a conqueror's ambition, but with a gardener's respect. Thanks for watching IfVerse. Subscribe for more mind-bending realities.